amazing speeches and speakers coming up tonight and taking some time to join us here. Much appreciated. We're going to dive right into it. We're flipping the script a little bit this week because I am very, very pleased to welcome a friend of mine, a special guest, and the Democrat who is going to win in the other U.S. Senate race here in Georgia. Now, for those of you who are just tuning in, y'all know I'm challenging Senator David Perdue. And joining me tonight is Reverend Raphael Warnock, who is challenging Senator Kelly Loeffler, Georgia, of course, being the only state in the country with 2 Senate races this year. Reverend, great to see you.
Great to be here with you. And I'm so honored to have this conversation and so proud of the work that you've been doing as you challenge David Perdue. This is an inflection point. We're going to do something really extraordinary in Georgia this year.
Yes, we are. Appreciate you being here and looking forward to really continuing to team up with you. I know our teams are working great together and looking forward to, I wish we could get out there and barnstorm together and rally together. In the interest of public health, we'll have to do it virtually, but we're going to be working closely together from now through November to deliver 2 Senate victories. Before we dive into questions, and by the way, everyone, tonight we're going to be taking some questions that folks submitted in advance, and we're going to be taking questions live from the audience. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, IG. I think next week we're going to be up on Twitch too. If you have a question, just drop it in the comments, drop it in the replies, and we will try to get to your questions. Apologies in advance, we won't be able to get to all of them. Before we start that question, Reverend, just give us, if you can, for those of folks who are just tuning in, a little bit of your background, where you're coming from.
Oh, you're certainly. So the journey that gets me here to run for the United States Senate is indicative of what makes America such a special place. I was born in public housing down in Savannah, Georgia, very large family. And out of 12 children, I'm the baby next to the baby, the knee baby. First college graduate in my family. My dad was a preacher and a small businessman who taught me the dignity and value of hard work. And him and my mother poured a lot in me, and I was able to graduate off and say I went to Morehouse College on a full faith scholarship. I didn't know how I would pay for the first semester, but somehow through grit and determination, and also with the help of a Pell Grant, that's public policy, low interest student loan, public policy, I was able to graduate from Morehouse and go on and earn 3 more degrees, including a PhD degree. And now almost 15 years ago, I became the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, the spiritual home of Martin Luther King Jr. And there I've been engaged in working on the issues that I care about, everything from voting rights to healthcare reform to fighting for the dignity of workers. And it's my activism that has finally led me to this place where I'm trying to translate my ministry and my work of activism and agitation into legislation and public policy.
That is beautiful. Thank you for the service to our community and our state thus far. And thank you for stepping up to run for office right now. A lot of folks who are tuning in online no doubt saw you presiding at Congressman John Lewis' funeral several weeks back. And to have a spiritual leader who is so deeply respected, who's had such a profound impact, already improving lives for ordinary people here in Georgia, now poised to represent our state in the Senate, is indeed a blessing. So thank you for taking this plunge, and it's an honor to run alongside you. We're gonna jump in now to some of the questions. And first of all, we have a question, Reverend, from Jenn in Duluth. Hey, Jenn. And Jenn is wondering, how will each of us govern differently from our opponent? And so that's Jenn from Duluth asking, how will each of us govern differently from our opponent? And Reverend?
So I'm running against Kelly Loeffler, who was appointed by Governor Kemp until the time for the special election. She's only been in office since January. She, of course, has never been elected by the people of Georgia. She's appointed. We're in the special election. But she has shown, and she wasted no time showing us exactly what kind of senator she would be. and what was her primary interest. Back in January, we were beginning, those of us who were just citizens, to hear rumblings about something called the coronavirus. Most of us didn't know what it was. We weren't sure how much attention to pay to it. And then the story evolved as we've known it. But during that time, when most of us knew very little or nothing about coronavirus, the United States senators received a private briefing on COVID-19. And that's the privilege you give to folks that you've asked to represent you on these issues. And what did Kelly Loeffler do after she received that information? She began to dump millions of dollars of her own stock and to purchase millions more in some other stock. And to make a long story short, she profited from the pandemic. And she seemed to be much more focused on sheltering her own investments than she was on protecting the people who were sheltering in, the people of Georgia, who were dealing with, basic questions, not how I save my millions of dollars of stock, but what am I going to do to keep my job? And if I keep my job and I miss a few paychecks, how am I going to stay in my house? And are my children going to be able to stay in school? These are the questions that ordinary folks were having to struggle with. And as Kelly Loeffler was selling her stock, she was telling her constituents nothing to be worried about here, nothing to be concerned about. And so I intend to do what I've always done, and that is to go into this office as someone who's committed to service. That's what drives me. How can I do the most for the highest number of people for as long as I can and as well as I can? And we're seeing this play out not only in how she responded initially, but she and Senator David Perdue, as you know, they're standing with the president as once again, they're trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act through a Supreme Court case that will be heard in just a couple of months. In the middle of a pandemic, they want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act and leave 1.8 million Georgians who have pre-existing conditions without health care coverage. And so I intend to govern as someone who knows who sent me there and who understands what an honor it is for the people of your state to ask you to represent them. And every morning you ought to be waking up thinking about them, looking out for them, doing the best you can for the people who sent you.
Thank you, Reverend. And the Senate stock trading scandal this year rocked the whole country. And the fact that both of Georgia's U.S. senators were caught up in it,
right,
just speaks to how blatant and flagrant the corruption in Washington is. I mean, it is a sort of deliberate disregard for basic ethics, shamelessness, pride, and ego and arrogance. And the remedy is at the ballot box. So, we are going to take a stand in Georgia this year against corruption and self-dealing. Something I want to add, and I'm not sure if you've seen this, Reverend, but Senator Perdue, this is his fundraising scheme. It's called the boardroom. Have you seen the boardroom? This is wild. So he sends these ornate invitations to lobbyists in DC, offering different levels of access to him personally for different prices. It's called a fulfillment program. It's literally what it says on the invitation. For a $7,500 corporate PAC check, and this is all in writing with this sort of cursive script, like it's a luxury hotel menu or something.
Wow.
For a $7,500 corporate PAC check, you're entitled to 4 meetings a year with David Perdue. You're entitled to an end-of-year phone call. You're entitled to a reception at his home. You're entitled to luxury retreats on a private island. A man who has not held a single in-person public town hall in 6 years as our senator is blatantly selling his time to lobbyists for corporate PAC checks. And if we want to understand why public policy doesn't serve the people, it serves narrow private interests.
Right.
Our broken campaign finance system, the fact that he can get away with raising money like that,
right,
answers the question. So We're going to keep moving here. Heather in Roswell. Hey, Heather. Heather asks, Georgia is now officially a COVID hotspot. Georgia also did not expand Medicaid. How can we ensure all Georgians have access to health care that meets the needs of our times, especially during this pandemic? Rev?
This is an issue I've been focused on for years. When we passed the Affordable Care Act, as that debate was going on in the Congress, I was preaching about it from my pulpit because I believe that healthcare is a human right. I believe that it is a moral mandate. Certainly the richest nation in the world can and should provide healthcare for all of its citizens. And Georgia caught up in the worst kind of politics. And I shouldn't say Georgia, really, the folks who were in office at the time were engaged in politics in the worst sense of the word, just focused on power and what's in it for me. And they refused to expand Medicaid. And so I and several other leaders staged a demonstration in the governor's office. And we had a sit-in. I was holding a sign that said, of all the injustices, Martin Luther King Jr. said, of all the injustices, inequality in healthcare is the most shocking and the most inhumane. And I was arrested in the governor's office here in Georgia, fighting that we might expand healthcare. At that time, 400,000 Georgians were in the Medicaid gap. Now, thanks to COVID-19, you're right, Georgia is a COVID-19 hotspot. We now have 500,000 people in the Medicaid gap. We have 1.8 million Georgians with pre-existing conditions. And you can imagine that with COVID-19 and its participation and with other comorbidities, you're going to have a whole lot more people with pre-existing conditions. So imagine having a law that doesn't protect people. Imagine not having a law that protects people with pre-existing conditions. And so this is something that I will be very focused on. We've had the 8th rural hospital in Georgia 2 weeks ago to announce that it will close. That's the 8th hospital if it closes since 2011. If we had expanded Medicaid, hospitals would have a lot more paying customers, and our rural healthcare systems, especially, and all of our hospitals would be better equipped to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. But the problem is we've got people in charge of government who don't believe in government, who are busy. When you think about these absurd arguments about masks and whether they ought to be mandated, it's coming from a kind of philosophy and ideology where people don't believe in government. And in 2017, they tried to starve the government, if you will, by passing this $2 trillion tax cut, not to ordinary people, not to middle class people, but to the richest of the richest of the rich, while pulling resources away from CHIP, the Children's Healthcare Program. And so what we're seeing with this global pandemic is that we have to be ready for the next pandemic. That we have to be ready to respond both medically and in terms of the social safety net, able to respond to the struggles that ordinary people find themselves in when something like this happens. And too many, driven by a kind of Ayn Rand ideology, have tried to strip those things away, redo the social contract, and we don't have to guess about the consequences of that. We're living through them right now.
And that ideology meets with the corrupt alliance with drug and insurance companies who want to extract as much cash as possible out of each customer without regard for our health, and which, as you pointed out, both of our opponents are trying to let off the leash so they can discriminate against folks with pre-existing conditions once again. And you know, to your question, Heather, and hello again to everyone in Roswell. As the Reverend said, the state's refusal to invest in the health of the people, the state's refusal to expand Medicaid, the state's neglect of preventative health care, when half our counties have no OBGYNs, when maternal mortality is sky high, when we've got widespread chronic illness, diabetes, asthma, hypertension, and now COVID-19 comes and preys upon those who are already weakened by this neglect for our people's health. And that means this disease spreads faster. And that means all of us, everyone, no matter class, no matter race, are more at risk because we have not invested in the health of the people of our state. And, you know, I'm going to go out on a limb here, Reverend, and speak for both of us and say that when we are in the US Senate, we will make a change. We will invest in the health of the people in this state and not in the profits of the insurance and drug companies. We have a lot of folks on Facebook Live who are asking how they can get involved and volunteer. So, Reverend, if folks want to get involved with your campaign, you know, obviously campaigns require resources, but they also require volunteers. We've got so many people who are tuned in right now who want to get involved. How can they sign up to help you out?
Great. You can see it on the screen right now. I believe you can go to warnock4georgia.com, and it's easy to volunteer. All of us who, you know, who were really looking forward to getting out through the state and doing more of just kind of one-on-one in-person meetings. I'm frustrated, and I know John is, that we aren't able to get out as much, but we've got to do what's necessary in order to keep people healthy. The flip side of that is that we're building an army of digital volunteers. And so whether you live in Georgia or not, you can volunteer and support our effort.
Appreciate that, Reverend. So yes, everyone, is warnock4georgia.com. And I just want to take a second and reflect on what a special moment this is in Georgia politics. So much effort has gone into registering and empowering voters. And Reverend, you were doing instrumental work in voter registration a decade ago that laid the foundations for expanded participation in our state. Here we are in a year like this, at a moment like this, the stakes sky high. All of future generations will look back on America at this moment. What's going to happen in 70-something days?
Right.
And judge the character of this country at this moment. We're at a fork in the road. Georgia is the decisive battleground state. We have 2 Senate races. And I'm just honored to be running alongside you. And I reflect often on how at this moment in our history, you got a young Jewish white guy who learned about public service at the feet of Congressman John Lewis, and a Black pastor who holds the same pulpit as Dr. King, a dear friend of Congressman John Lewis, who presided over his service, where there were 3 sitting presidents in attendance running together as a ticket in Georgia at a moment of such historical importance. It's just an honor to be running alongside you, Reverend. So thank you. And we got a question now from Rick, who asks, how can we combat voter suppression and make sure every vote is counted? And this question is coming in live on Twitter. So Rick, thanks for the question. And Reverend, over to you.
Well, first of all, I can't let you get off that easily. I've got to say how honored I am to be running beside you, sir. And
appreciate it.
This is a winning ticket. And we represent the continuation of a grand tradition that is multiracial, that is multi-religious, that embraces people of moral courage who may not embrace any particular religious tradition at all. E pluribus unum, out of many one. This is America at its finest. Our strength is in our diversity. And we need this now more than we've needed it in a very long time, because there are forces in our country that are so caught up, they know they can't lead us, and so they're trying to divide us. And they're not even being subtle about it. And so when I think about running alongside you, you know, I feel like we are incredibly privileged to be able to do this. And while there's a sacrifice to running for public office, you know, some paid a much heftier sacrifice. John Lewis laid his life on the line. Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, 2 Jews and an African-American, lost their lives in the dark days of Mississippi. fighting for voting rights, and people are playing with this blood-stained right of ours, the right to vote. So as we talk about voter suppression, as we talk about the sanctity of the ballot, we need to recognize that it is a blood-stained ballot that has in it the sacrifice of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, 2 Jews and an African-American, Viola Luiso, a white woman who gave so much. Hosea Williams was on that bridge with John Lewis. And so I see this as the continuation of that work. When the Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marched with Dr. King, trying to get the voting rights, he said that he felt like his feet were praying. And that's what we need in a moment like this. We need people who pray not only with their lips, but with their legs. And I believe a vote is a kind of prayer for the kind of world that we want to see and that we want our children to experience. And that's why we have to fight so hard against voter suppression. And so I want to say to the person who asked the question that we're very focused on that. We're fighting it right now. In fact, my church is one of a few plaintiffs in a lawsuit. We're suing the state of Georgia for its history of voter suppression. And sadly, they gave us more grist for the mill, more evidence of what we've been arguing during the June 9th primary. We saw malfeasance, we saw incompetence, and we're laying all of that before the feet of a judge right now as we raise these issues. But in addition to that, while we fight it within the context of the courts and jurisprudence, the way to respond to rabid voter suppression is massive voter registration, education, and mobilization. And we've been doing that for years. That's why we've registered through the New Georgia Project, which I chaired, 400,000 new voters since 2014. In this state, we've registered 750,000 new voters since Stacey came within a hair of seizing the governor's office. With her opponent's thumb on the scale, he barely squeaked by after all of the irregularities. And since then, we've registered 750,000 new voters in this state. 49% of them are people of color. 45% of them are under 30. So it is a diverse coalition. We have right now within our hands the power to push Georgia towards its highest self, embodied in the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. and so many others who fought alongside him. We have within our hands the power to flip this state, to transform the South. We know from our history that as goes the South, so goes the nation, and push the country toward the more perfect union that we talk about. So we'll be pushing early voting, vote by mail, souls to the polls through our various congregations, so that by the time we get to election day on November 3rd, most of the work, by and large, should have already been done. We need to think of October as voter month. Overwhelm them. The more we show up, sadly, there's going to be some of this that's going to happen. But the more we show up, the harder it becomes for them to steal the election. And then finally, we got to remind our folks that there's somebody that you're so powerful that, and for folks who say, does my vote count? Absolutely, it counts. In fact, your vote is so powerful and your voice is so important that some people are doing a whole lot of work to suppress it.
Yep.
You ought to stand up and say, no, that won't happen, not on our watch.
Well said, Reverend. And, I got to say, I'm feeling optimistic because the resources, energy, personnel, strategy, expertise that are being brought to bear in and outside of court here in Georgia to defend voting rights is truly unprecedented. Stacey's doing amazing work at Fair Fight. Voting rights organizations are fully engaged. And the other side of that, folks, is that we need y'all to make those phone calls, to send those text messages, to empower people to vote, to make sure that their mail ballots are properly filled out, to field the incoming calls on the voter protection hotlines when people have concerns. We can't let those lines get oversaturated around, critical moments. So there's 2 actions I want everyone who is watching right now to take. The first is, if you are a Georgia voter or if you got family or friends in Georgia, get out your phone, please, and just mark this date, Saturday, October 24th. That is mandatory statewide Saturday early voting here in Georgia. Saturday early voting. So please make a note of that date and spread it far and wide. And second of all, because we need you as volunteers, we need your help to protect the ballot here. I want to throw up warnockforgeorgia.com again. Sign up to volunteer with the Reverend's campaign. Sign up to volunteer with my campaign. Our campaigns are working closely together to protect ballot access here in Georgia. I think we got time for one more short one, Reverend, before we have to sign off and let the convention take people's attention. But I want to close with a question that just came in on Facebook Live from Catherine. And Catherine, thank you for asking your question. I'm sorry, everyone, we can't get to everybody's questions. We're doing our best. We keep doing these weekly. I hope we'll have the Reverend back, and appreciate everyone participating. So Catherine's question is, what will you do for teachers who are being intimidated by the Trump administration and school districts? Rev?
Well, the first thing we've got to do in the midst of this COVID-19 challenge is, we've got to get serious about this health challenge that we're facing. And right now, our teachers are on the front line. They are among the essential workers that are putting their lives on the line and doing the best that they can. And they're being very heroic, and they're also being creative, as there are many places where it's not safe. It's not safe for the kids to return. Listen, I've got small kids, and God knows I love my kids to death, but I'd love for them to be in school right now. And it's tough. And so I feel the struggle that parents feel. But let me just say that we absolutely should not have a president who's trying to bully teachers and bully kids into risking their lives so that he can win an election. I don't think education and his commitment to reading is what's driving Donald Trump in this moment. And we just got to stand up through our teachers' unions, through the ways in which we organize, and we've got to say no. We got to say it in this moment. And then come November 3rd, we got to send a very clear message that the way to get through this, you can't bully teachers any more than you can bully the virus. We know what we need to do. We need masks, social distancing, contact tracing, testing, and we need to get the curve down so that we can safely return. And we've seen right here in Georgia, when you return too quickly and recklessly, you end up going back home anyway. And so I don't know how many times it takes for us to see this. In the meantime, we got to make sure that workers receive the kind of care that they need in these various relief packages. The Senate should be at work right now. And I assure you that when John and I are there, we'll be standing up for you rather than the special interests.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it, that the Senate right now and David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler can look around at the state of the world and say, you know what, this is a good moment for us to just take a month off. We've earned it. I mean, and to build on what you said, Reverend, in response to Catherine's question, it wasn't a mystery that schools were going to be reopening in August and September. It wasn't a mystery that school districts, local school districts, lack the resources and expertise necessary to grapple with a challenge of this magnitude. So, a little bit of forward planning, a little bit of strategic thinking. It doesn't take, visionary genius
right.
to recognize, hey, we're members of the United States Senate. Maybe we should get moving on support for schools in May or June so that they can receive the resources in time to put it to work in July and August, so that they can either meet CDC public health guidelines for in-person reopening, or if not, make virtual learning as fruitful as possible. It was no secret that parents in places where schools were partially or fully closed are going to need help accessing daycare. They could have been working on emergency childcare credits in May and June and July so that families would have options and ways to take care of their kids if school districts couldn't reopen. But you know what? They don't care. They're too busy lining their own pockets. They're too busy having champagne receptions with lobbyists on private islands. They were wrong about this at every step. They told us it was no big deal. And their foolishness has gotten a lot of people killed and done a lot of economic damage, and they don't deserve to be reelected. And Reverend and I are taking it to them. So we appreciate y'all being here. We deeply appreciate the participation from everyone who is watching live and sending encouragement and getting involved and volunteering and making phone calls and making those grassroots contributions. The Reverend and I, we just have one role to play in this effort. This is a team effort. This is a historic national effort to restore decency and competence and integrity to the highest levels of our government, and to take this country closer to its founding ideals and aspirations than it ever has before. America is a work in progress, and the Reverend and I are ready to work together to dig out from this rubble and rebuild on top. And with that, Reverend, your closing remarks, please. And thank you again. Such an honor to have you here.
No, you said it well. And thank you very much. And to all of that, the preacher simply says amen.
Amen. Much love, Rev. Talk to you soon.